Hello, today is November the 4th, 2013, and I'm happy to tell you we're in the studio of our video club here in Laguna Woods. There's a lot to do here, and this is certainly one of the fun things. We're continuing with a series called Remarkable Lives. I'm Sydney, and today it's my pleasure to introduce you to a friend of mine, Helen Tan. Good morning.
Hello, Sydney.
Hello. Helen and I have been friends for about 6 years. We took a writing class together, and since then, Helen has written 2 books after the age of 88, and she's presently working on her autobiography at 92. So, my favorite parts are the early years of China. Helen, can you tell me what your earliest memories are of you living in China?
I was grown up in a very old-fashioned Chinese family. We live in the southern part of China, near Hong Kong and Canton. My early life, so far I can remember, was my great-grandfather. He was an orphan. He had no way to earn a living. So he went to Vietnam to be a rice trader. A rice trader is dealing with rice, and he doing quite well. Eventually, he became a landowner. In fact, what I told about his story entirely different. They told me great-grandfather went to Vietnam to work with a Chinese landowner, and later on married his boss's only daughter and inherited all the land from her. And later on he bought more land. He became a big landowner in Vietnam.
I know he made a lot of money because you had a very big house. How many bedrooms did you have in the house?
Well, after my great-grandfather passed away, she and my grandfather, her only son, decided to settle in China. They bought a house with altogether about 26 bedrooms, with no running water and no restroom. But no running water was not a problem. We had 2 wells in our house. We had plenty of water to use. No restroom, also no problem. We used bucket system.
I see. And servants in the early years, in the 20s, 1920s, the house had many servants?
You see, we had 2 big kitchens. One big kitchen catering for our children and the servant and the maid. Therefore, in my early day, I never eat with my parents.
So you had separate quarters. And your grandmother, I found her very interesting because she had bound feet.
Yeah, you see, my grandmother came from a good family. She was famous of her little bound feet. She's truly a very good, fine lady. Contrast with my great-grandmother, she had a pair of natural feet. In China at the time, only very poor family had a natural feet. So all my native friend and neighbor all looked down at her. They thought a very strange Vietnamese woman came to the house, and then she will walk out the street without any shame.
Without any shame, she had large feet.
Yeah.
But she was a very wealthy woman.
Yeah.
But they thought she was a worker.
Strange. They call her that Vietnamese woman. This was a great insult, but my great-grandmother never cared of it. She just go on with her own business. In fact, she owned a few stores nearby our house. We used to go there to buy sundry and didn't know it was owned by my great-grandmother.
Wow. Your grandmother had a hairdresser.
Oh, yes. That's also very interesting, if I had time to say.
Sure.
Well, my grandmother had a hairdresser. She came to the house to do my grandmother hairdo 7 days a week, even sometimes twice a day. She came also dressed up in white, very crispy overall, with black trousers and braided hair. And grandmother really welcomed her so well because, in fact, she is also brought news for my grandmother. That time we had no telephone. So when she came, she brought news from my grandmother, friends, relatives.
Is it because your grandmother wasn't able to leave the house because she had bound feet? She stayed mostly in the house?
She never stepped foot outside the house. She only had a sedan chair brought into her when she had social gathering.
So really the hairdresser brought her all the news of the
That's
outside
right.
world. And she even had her twice a day
Yeah.
because it was so interesting.
Sometime I was playing along nearby. The hairdresser would say, "Why don't you go out to play?" In fact, she didn't want me to hear her secret talk with my grandmother.
Oh gosh, those are fun days.
So grandmother would give me something and then get me out of the house. The room.
And grandfather. Grandfather had rice fields in Vietnam.
Well, grandfather, in fact, was quite a character.
Mm-hmm.
He went to Japan to study law. That was in Sun Yat-sen Revolution time. And he never worked with anybody because she had to manage her land in Vietnam. He had to spend 6 months a year in Vietnam, 6 months in China. So he told my grandmother, say, "I need a woman to look after me while I'm in Vietnam." He was eyeing my grandmother's personal maid, a young lady. Grandmother say, "I had to ask her. If she agree, you can have her." But the young girl say, "I would rather be a wife to a poor family. Besides, I don't want to go to Vietnam."
She didn't like your grandfather.
No, that's not her life. She want different way. So with my grandmother permission, grandfather took a young lady to Vietnam as his concubine or second wife.
And when he brought her home, he wanted to bring her into the house, but your grandmother...
When they came back to China, there is accommodation problem. We had different quarter. So grandfather had a bungalow built in a garden as his own quarter.
That's the story I love. And when your grandmother was running the house, you loved your grandma, and you would run in her bedroom, and something really excited you in that bedroom.
Oh, that is my maternal grandmother. My grandmother also, maternal grandmother, also a character. Do I have time?
We have time for... Yes, we do.
All right. That my parents lived next door to each other. They never met. It was a matchmaker used photo to arrange this union. My maternal grandmother loved this marriage, but she had a big problem because my mother was 3 years older than my father. That wouldn't do in that time. So my grandmother hid my mother's age. So make it work. It turned out to work beautifully. Then,
but there was tragedy when
No.
your mother passed away.
No, that was later on.
Okay.
And then my grandmother had another problem. She had given my mother a rich dowry. including a newly imported singer machine. That singer machine is like a furniture, with a stand.
No, they were big in
That
the
was
day.
the thing my grandmother wanted to show off. So she said, it's a great pity. I had such good diary. And then it's no fun, just bring to next door to my father's house. So a woman of her friends said, you can have one. You can have all your homemade furniture and your good things away from my father's house. Had a wedding procession, go to the end of the street, and then from the next street, enter into my father's house.
So they brought it all in.
So,
And can you just say briefly, I know you were 9 years old when your mother passed away after giving birth to 5 children.
yeah. You see, my mother gave birth to 3 girls, 2 boys. And every time when she gave birth to a baby, my grandmother always engaged a wet nurse for the baby for 1 year, the contract 1 year. And then also engaged a professional lady to look after my mother. You will be surprised to learn my mother was not allowed to get out of bed for 1 month. It was the lady look after her. When my mother had my younger brother, the 5th boy, she developing a very high temperature. And then we had a lot of kind of talk about ghosts, everything. One of servants say my mother must be possessed. Maybe her last life husband found her. And then my grandmother went to my mother, talked to her face to face, as if she was talking to a spirit. My grandmother say, you can ask anything you want, but not her. My mother say, I like to eat a kind of fruit. In fact, at the time, one fruit out of season, you cannot get it. My grandmother was so sad. Say, that I can't do. Another servant say, oh, she knew a living Buddha saved many lives. So my grandmother say, okay, ask me to go with this servant to find the living Buddha. When I got to his house, I saw the big fat man standing in the middle of the room. My servant had coached me, so I quickly go to the living Buddha, kneel down to beg for my mother's life. He put his 2 big fat hands on my head and murmuring a few words and gave me a few yellow paper. All the Chinese know this yellow paper, we call it magic paper.
Magic.
This paper will do magic. So ask me, take this paper, slip into my mother's pillow. That's all. So we returned home. I did as I was told. The servant said, well, it's good sign. Because the mother saw me, she turned her face to the other side. The spirit must be scared of the yellow paper. In fact, only 2-3 days later, my mother passed away.
Oh, that was a sad time for you. One of the things that we all know about you, if you know Helen for 5 minutes, she cooks for you. And she makes a most delicious lotus blossom soup, actually in her crock pot. And she floats something that I didn't even know existed, lotus nuts. So I want to thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Lotus nuts for Helen Tan.
Thank you, Sydney.
And again, I'm going to remind you to come on down to the video club. A lot going on down here. We're right next to Clubhouse 2. And thank you for being with us, and thank you for being with us.